Sarah Mitchell had always dreamed of visiting London. After saving money for 3 years working at her local diner in Ohio, she finally booked her first international trip. The 28-year-old waitress packed her bags with excitement, her phone fully charged and ready to capture every moment of what she called the adventure of a lifetime. Landing at Heathrow Airport on a crisp October morning, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the bustling city. Everything seemed so different from her small hometown of Millerville, where the biggest attraction was the annual Corn Festival, the red double-decker buses. The accents she heard everywhere and the historic buildings made her feel like she had stepped into a movie. Her first stop was Buckingham Palace, the place she had seen countless times in movies and documentaries. Sarah had planned this visit meticulously, reading travel blogs and watching YouTube videos about the best photo spots. She wore her favorite bright yellow jacket, thinking it would make her photos more vibrant against the palace's gray stone walls. As she approached the palace gates, Sarah noticed crowds of tourists gathered around, all pointing their cameras in different directions. The morning sun cast beautiful shadows across the courtyard, and she could see the famous red-coated guards standing at attention. Her heart raced with excitement as she realized she was actually there, standing in front of one of the world's most famous buildings. Sarah pulled out her phone and started taking selfies, trying to get the perfect shot with the palace in the background. She noticed other tourists doing the same thing, some with professional cameras and others with tablets. Everyone seemed to be having the same idea: capture this moment forever. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Sarah overheard conversations in multiple languages as people from all over the world gathered for the same reason she was there. A family from Japan stood nearby, their young daughter wearing a princess dress and tiara. An elderly couple from Germany carefully studied their guidebook, pointing at different sections of the palace. What caught Sarah's attention most were the magnificent horses. She had read about the Queen's Guard and their ceremonial duties, but seeing the horses up close was breathtaking. These weren't ordinary horses. They were massive, beautifully groomed animals that seemed to command respect just by their presence. Their dark coats gleamed in the sunlight, and their riders sat perfectly straight in their ornate uniforms. Sarah had grown up around horses back home, helping at her neighbor's small farm during summers. She considered herself comfortable around animals and felt drawn to these majestic creatures. The way they stood so still and composed, even with hundreds of tourists nearby, impressed her greatly. She began walking closer to get a better view, her phone camera already switching to video mode. Sarah wanted to capture everything: the sound of the horses breathing, the jingle of their equipment, and the stoic expressions of the guards. This was exactly the kind of authentic London experience she had hoped for. As she moved through the crowd, Sarah noticed that most tourists kept a respectful distance from the horses and guards. There were barriers and ropes marking certain areas, and official-looking signs posted around the perimeter. However, her excitement and eagerness to get the perfect shot began to cloud her judgment about these boundaries. The morning was perfect for photography. The lighting was ideal, there weren't too many clouds, and the autumn air was crisp and clear. Sarah felt like everything was falling into place for her dream vacation. She had no idea that her enthusiasm and lack of familiarity with royal protocols were about to lead her into a situation that would become much more memorable than she ever anticipated. Sarah continued taking photos, gradually moving closer to the horses with each shot. Her confidence grew as she watched other tourists taking pictures nearby. She reasoned that if everyone else was doing it, it must be acceptable. What she didn't realize was that she was slowly crossing invisible lines of appropriate tourist behavior. The horse nearest to her was a beautiful black mare named Wellington, standing with remarkable stillness despite the chaos of clicking cameras and chattering visitors surrounding her. The guard mounted on Wellington was Corporal James Henderson, a 24-year-old soldier who had been serving with the Household Division for 2 years. He had seen thousands of tourists during his ceremonial duties, and he could usually spot trouble before it started. Sarah's excitement reached new heights as she got what she thought were amazing shots. She decided to switch her phone to selfie mode, wanting to get herself in the picture with the magnificent horse in the background. Turning around with her back to Wellington, she held her phone up high and started snapping photos, slowly backing up to get a better angle. Other tourists began to notice Sarah's bold approach. A British family with 2 young children watched nervously as she got closer to the horse. The father whispered to his wife that perhaps someone should say something, but like many polite bystanders, he hesitated to interfere with another tourist's experience. A group of German tourists nearby also observed Sarah's movements with growing concern. They had read their guidebook thoroughly and understood the importance of maintaining proper distance from the ceremonial guards and their horses. One of them, an older woman named Helga, actually took a step forward as if to warn Sarah but stopped when her husband gently pulled her back. Corporal Henderson noticed the approaching tourist through his peripheral vision. His training had taught him to remain focused straight ahead during ceremonial duties, but he also knew his responsibilities included ensuring public safety and maintaining the dignity of his position. He began to assess the situation, knowing that tourists often got carried away with their photography. Sarah, completely absorbed in getting the perfect selfie, continued backing up slowly. She was concentrating so hard on the angle and lighting that she lost awareness of her surroundings. The background noise of the crowd seemed to fade away as she focused on her phone screen, trying to capture what she imagined would be the highlight photo of her entire trip. The horse Wellington began to show subtle signs of awareness about the approaching stranger. Her ears twitched slightly, and she shifted her weight almost imperceptibly. These were small movements that an experienced horseman would notice immediately, but Sarah was too distracted to pick up on these warning signals. Meanwhile, other tourists started pulling out their own cameras, not to take pictures of the palace or the guard, but to capture what was beginning to look like an unusual situation unfolding before their eyes. Some visitors sensed that something interesting was about to happen, though none of them could have predicted exactly what was coming. A young French student named Pierre, who was studying international relations and had a particular interest in British royal traditions, watched with fascination and growing alarm. He understood the serious nature of the guards' duties and the strict protocols surrounding their ceremonial roles. He wanted to call out to Sarah but wasn't sure if intervening would be appropriate or if it might cause an even bigger scene. Sarah finally found the angle she wanted for her selfie, with the imposing horse perfectly positioned behind her and the palace visible in the distance. She felt she had created the ideal shot, but in her enthusiasm to capture this moment, she took one more step backward, wanting to get slightly more of the horse in the frame. This final step brought her within arm's reach of Wellington, the professional distance that should always be maintained between the public and the ceremonial horses had been completely eliminated. Sarah was now close enough to touch the horse, though she still didn't fully grasp how dramatically she had overstepped the boundaries of appropriate tourist behavior. The crowd around them began to quiet down, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even Sarah, despite her focus on photography, began to feel a change in the atmosphere around her. Wellington, the ceremonial horse, had been trained for years to remain calm in crowded situations, but every animal has its limits. As Sarah stepped even closer, the mare began to display clear signs of discomfort. Her nostrils flared slightly, as she caught Sarah's unfamiliar scent mixed with strong perfume and the lingering smell of airplane food from her recent flight. The horse's training included exposure to crowds, cameras, and general tourist behavior, but Sarah's proximity was crossing into territory that triggered Wellington's natural instincts. The mare's ears pinned back against her head, a warning sign that experienced horse handlers would recognize immediately as a clear indication of irritation or potential aggression. Corporal Henderson felt the subtle changes in his mount's posture, through his seat and legs. Years of working with horses had taught him to read these signals like a language. He knew Wellington was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, but his ceremonial position required him to maintain his stoic demeanor, while simultaneously managing a potentially dangerous situation. Sarah remained blissfully unaware of the horse's growing agitation. She was busy adjusting her phone's camera settings, trying to get better lighting for her photos. The autumn sun had shifted slightly, creating what she thought would be perfect backlighting for a dramatic silhouette shot. She even started to reach up, thinking about touching the horse's neck for what she imagined would be an incredible photo. The crowd of tourists around them began to sense tension in the air. Children stopped chattering, and parents instinctively pulled their little ones closer. A tour guide leading a group of Italian visitors noticed the situation developing and quietly started directing her group to move to a different viewing area, though she didn't want to create panic by making any dramatic announcements. Wellington's breathing became more pronounced, creating visible puffs of vapor in the cool morning air. The horse began to stamp one front hoof, a behavior that horse experts recognize as a clear warning signal. This wasn't just restlessness. It was Wellington communicating her discomfort with the situation in the only way she could. An elderly British gentleman, who had served in the military decades earlier, recognized the signs immediately. He had worked around ceremonial horses during his own service and knew exactly what he was witnessing. He cleared his throat loudly and called out in a firm but polite voice, "Miss, I think you should step back from the horse." Sarah heard the voice but was so focused on her photography that she only half processed what was said. She turned slightly toward the man and gave him a friendly wave, assuming he was just being social with a fellow tourist. Her attention immediately returned to her phone screen, where she was reviewing the photos she had just taken and planning her next shots. Wellington's tail began to swish more aggressively, another clear warning sign that the horse's patience was wearing thin. The mare had been standing in position for over an hour already, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the constant stream of tourists, camera flashes, and general commotion. Sarah's close proximity was the final straw that pushed Wellington beyond her comfort zone. Corporal Henderson made a subtle adjustment to his position in the saddle, preparing for whatever might happen next. His training included scenarios exactly like this one, though he hoped the situation would resolve itself peacefully. He couldn't speak or break his ceremonial stance, but he was ready to act if necessary to protect both the tourist and his horse. Other tourists began taking out their phones, but now they were recording what looked like a potential incident rather than just capturing typical vacation photos. A teenage boy from Australia started a live stream on social media, whispering to his followers about the crazy American tourist who doesn't know she's about to get in trouble. The tension reached a critical point when Sarah decided to try one more selfie, this time extending her arm backward toward the horse while holding her phone forward to capture both herself and Wellington in the same shot. As her hand moved toward the horse's neck, Wellington had finally had enough. The mare turned her head sharply toward Sarah, ears flat against her skull and eyes showing white around the edges. This was the final warning before Wellington would take action to protect her personal space. The horse's entire body language communicated danger, but Sarah was still looking at her phone screen instead of paying attention to the massive animal right behind her. What happened next would be captured on dozens of cameras and phones, creating a viral moment that Sarah never intended to be part of during her dream vacation to London. Wellington made her move with the swift precision of a trained ceremonial horse who had reached her breaking point. The mare opened her mouth and clamped down on Sarah's bright yellow jacket, right at the shoulder area. The bite wasn't intended to seriously injure. It was Wellington's way of firmly establishing boundaries and moving the intrusive tourist away from her personal space. Sarah's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She let out a piercing scream that echoed across the palace courtyard, dropping her phone as she felt the horse's powerful grip on her jacket. The sudden realization that she was being held by a massive animal sent waves of panic through her entire body. Her mind couldn't process what was happening fast enough to respond appropriately. The crowd's response was instantaneous. Gasps and shouts erupted from dozens of tourists as they witnessed the shocking scene. Parents grabbed their children, some people started backing away quickly, while others moved closer with their cameras rolling. The peaceful morning atmosphere at Buckingham Palace had transformed into chaos within seconds. Corporal Henderson immediately took control of the situation with professional precision. Without breaking his ceremonial bearing more than absolutely necessary, he applied gentle pressure with his legs and reins to signal Wellington to release her grip. His years of training kicked in as he managed both his mount and the crisis simultaneously, demonstrating the skill that made the Queen's Guard one of the world's most respected ceremonial units. Sarah tried to pull away from the horse, but Wellington's grip was firm and pulling only made the situation more frightening. The tourist's panic increased as she realized she couldn't break free on her own. Her bright yellow jacket began to stretch and tear slightly under the pressure, and she could feel the horse's warm breath on her neck, which only intensified her fear. Other tourists reacted in various ways to the unfolding drama. Some immediately started recording videos, sensing they were witnessing something that would become viral on social media. Others showed genuine concern for Sarah's safety, with several people shouting advice like "don't move and stay calm." A few visitors who had experience with horses recognized that Wellington wasn't being truly aggressive, but was simply establishing her boundaries. The palace security personnel, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance, began moving quickly toward the incident. These officers were trained to handle exactly these types of situations, balancing tourist safety with the protection of the ceremonial horses and guards. They approached calmly but efficiently, knowing that any sudden movements might escalate the situation. Wellington held her grip for what felt like an eternity to Sarah, but was actually only about 10 seconds. The horse was making her point clear. This human had violated her personal space and needed to learn proper respect. Once she felt she had communicated her message effectively, Wellington released her hold and stepped back slightly, returning to her professional stance as if nothing had happened. Sarah stumbled forward, free from the horse's grasp, but shaking, with adrenaline and shock. She spun around to face Wellington, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear, surprise, and embarrassment. Her carefully planned outfit was now wrinkled and slightly torn, and her hair was disheveled from the encounter. The perfect tourist photos she had envisioned were the furthest thing from her mind now. The immediate area around Sarah and Wellington buzzed with activity. Palace security officers reached the scene, quickly assessing whether anyone was injured and whether the situation required further intervention. Corporal Henderson maintained his position, but kept a watchful eye on both his horse and the shaken tourist, ready to act again if necessary. Other members of the Queen's Guard, stationed at different points around the palace, had noticed the commotion but remained at their posts as their training dictated. However, they were all alert and prepared to assist if the situation escalated further. The professionalism of these soldiers was evident in how they balanced their ceremonial duties with the practical need to manage an unexpected incident. Sarah looked around at the crowd of tourists, many of whom were still filming her with their phones and cameras. The realization that her embarrassing encounter was being recorded by dozens of strangers added a new layer of mortification to her already overwhelming experience. What was supposed to be her dream photo opportunity had turned into a nightmare of public humiliation. The incident had lasted less than a minute from start to finish, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. The peaceful morning at one of London's most famous landmarks had been permanently altered, and Sarah's vacation had taken a turn she could never have imagined when she first planned her trip to England. Palace security officers quickly approached Sarah to assess her condition and ensure she wasn't seriously injured. The lead officer, Sergeant Patricia Williams, had dealt with similar incidents before and knew how to handle shaken tourists with both professionalism and compassion. She spoke in calm, measured tones, asking Sarah if she needed medical attention and helping her understand what had just happened. Sarah was physically unharmed aside from some minor fabric damage to her jacket, but emotionally she was struggling to process the experience. The adrenaline rush was beginning to fade, replaced by embarrassment and the dawning realization that she had somehow violated important protocols. She kept apologizing repeatedly, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for since no one had explicitly told her the rules she had broken. The crowd of tourists began to disperse slowly, though many continued to watch from a distance. Some visitors approached Sarah with words of support, sharing their own stories of travel mishaps and cultural misunderstandings. A kind elderly woman from Canada offered Sarah a bottle of water and sat with her for a few minutes, helping her calm down and regain her composure. Sergeant Williams explained to Sarah the importance of maintaining proper distance from the ceremonial horses and guards. She outlined the safety reasons behind these protocols, emphasizing that the horses, while highly trained, were still powerful animals with natural instincts. The officer's explanation was educational rather than punitive, helping Sarah understand the seriousness of what had occurred without making her feel worse about her mistake. Meanwhile, the videos and photos of the incident were already beginning to circulate on social media. The teenage Australian boy's livestream had been viewed by hundreds of people in real time, and several other tourists had uploaded their footage to various platforms. Within an hour of the incident, hashtags like "Talk to your Buckingham Palace horse" and "Our tourist fail" were starting to trend online. Wellington, the horse at the center of the drama, had returned to her perfectly professional demeanor as if nothing unusual had happened. Corporal Henderson gave her a subtle pat of appreciation for her restraint. He knew that his mount had handled the situation exactly as she was trained to do. The horse had established boundaries without causing serious harm, demonstrating the careful balance between discipline and safety that defined the ceremonial guard animals. Sarah's dropped phone had been retrieved by a helpful tourist and returned to her, though the screen now had a significant crack from when it hit the palace courtyard. As she looked at the damaged device, she realized it was a fitting metaphor for how her perfect vacation photos had turned into something completely unexpected. The phone still worked, but like her travel experience, it would never be quite the same. Palace officials took down Sarah's contact information and provided her with educational materials about royal protocol and tourist guidelines. They emphasized that she wasn't in legal trouble, but they wanted to ensure she understood the importance of respecting boundaries around working ceremonial units. The materials included information about appropriate viewing distances and photography, etiquette for future visits. Other tourists who had witnessed the incident began sharing their perspectives with Sarah. A British family explained how the Queen's guard horses were working animals, not tourist attractions, and deserved the same respect as the human soldiers. A group of horse enthusiasts from Ireland praised Wellington's restraint, explaining that many horses would have reacted much more aggressively to such an intrusion. The incident became a learning moment for many of the tourists present. Parents used it as an opportunity to teach their children about respecting animals and following rules in foreign countries. Several visitors approached the remaining guards with newfound appreciation for their discipline and professionalism, understanding better the challenges they faced dealing with crowds while maintaining their ceremonial duties. As news of the EIO incident spread through social media, it sparked debates about tourist behavior and cultural sensitivity. Some commenters criticized Sarah harshly for her actions, while others defended her as simply being an enthusiastic visitor who made an innocent mistake. The incident highlighted the ongoing challenges that popular tourist destinations face in managing visitor behavior while preserving important traditions. Sarah spent the rest of her morning at the palace reflecting on what had happened, with several kind tourists and palace staff members helping her process the experience. She began to see it not just as an embarrassing mistake, but as an unexpected lesson in cultural awareness and animal behavior that would stay with her forever. By the time Sarah returned to her hotel that evening, the video of her encounter with Wellington had exploded across the internet. Multiple versions of the incident were circulating on different social media platforms, each with millions of views and thousands of comments. Sarah discovered her unwanted fame when her sister called from Ohio, having seen the video shared on Facebook by their high school classmates. The viral nature of the incident brought both positive and negative attention. While some online commenters were harsh and critical, many others expressed empathy for Sarah's situation and praised her for handling the aftermath with grace. Travel bloggers began using her experience as a case study in cultural awareness, and several animal behavior experts provided educational commentary about horse psychology and the importance of respecting working animals. Sarah made the decision to embrace her unexpected internet fame constructively. She created a blog post about her experience, titled, "What I Learned from Being Bitten by a Royal Horse," which detailed not just the incident itself, but her subsequent education about British royal traditions and horse behavior. Her honest, self-deprecating account of the situation resonated with many readers who had their own stories of travel mishaps. The blog post went viral in its own right, but for much more positive reasons than the original video. Sarah's ability to laugh at herself while acknowledging her mistakes and sharing what she learned made her an unlikely ambassador for respectful tourism. She received messages from travelers around the world sharing their own stories of cultural misunderstandings, and thanking her for normalizing the experience of making mistakes while learning. Wellington, the horse who had become an internet sensation, alongside Sarah, continued her ceremonial duties with the same professionalism she had always shown. Palace officials noted an increase in visitors asking questions about the horses and their training, suggesting that the viral incident had actually increased public interest in and respect for the ceremonial guard animals. Corporal Henderson, who had managed the situation with such skill, received recognition from his superiors for his handling of the incident. His ability to maintain ceremonial protocol while ensuring everyone's safety was highlighted as an example of the high standards expected from the Queen's Guard. He continued his duties, now with the added experience of having managed a viral internet moment. The incident led to some positive changes at Buckingham Palace. Officials decided to install additional educational signage about appropriate behavior around the ceremonial horses and guards. They also began offering brief educational talks at certain times of the day, helping tourists understand the history and significance of the traditions they were witnessing. Sarah's remaining days in London were filled with unexpected adventures related to her newfound fame. Fellow tourists recognized her and wanted to hear the full story. Tour guides began incorporating her experience into their talks about royal protocol, and she even received an invitation to visit a local equestrian center to learn more about horse behavior and safety. The cracked phone that had captured none of her intended perfect photos became Sarah's favorite souvenir from the trip. She kept it as a reminder that sometimes the most memorable travel experiences are the ones you never planned for. The device eventually stopped working entirely, but by then Sarah had learned to value experiences over photographs. When Sarah finally returned to Ohio, she had become something of a local celebrity. The story of her encounter with the royal horse made it into the Millerville newspaper, and she was invited to speak at the library about her London adventure. Her presentation, which included lessons about cultural sensitivity and animal behavior, was so popular that she was asked to speak at neighboring towns as well. The viral video continued to circulate for months, often resurfacing during discussions about tourist behavior or animal training. Sarah learned to see it as a positive force for education, even though it hadn't started that way. She received letters from parents thanking her for providing a teaching moment about respecting animals and following rules in foreign places. Years later, Sarah would look back on her encounter with Wellington as the moment that changed her perspective on travel. What began as a quest for the perfect Instagram photo evolved into a deeper appreciation for the places she visited and the importance of approaching new cultures with humility and respect. Her accidental viral fame had taught her lessons that no guidebook could have provided, and she became a more thoughtful and responsible traveler because of it. The incident at Buckingham Palace remained a talking point for discussions about modern tourism, social media, and the intersection of tradition with contemporary visitor behavior. Sarah's story became a reminder that in our connected world, a single moment of poor judgment can have far-reaching consequences, but also that those consequences don't have to define us if we choose to learn and grow from our mistakes.